welcome to the latest Red Robin Podcast World Cup special, powered by 360 Chartered Accountants and Budget Ties Auto Centre. England are now just one game away from reaching the World Cup final, but have to bypass a resurgent Samoan side who took part in the game of the tournament so far when they dispatched much fancied Tonga last time out. Joining me to reflect on last week's quarterfinals and look forward to the semi-finals is the man behind the mic, live from down under, the irrepressible Jason Costo. How are you doing, my friend?
G'day, Johno. G'day to everybody in the Rugby League universe. And Johno, would be remiss of both you and I today on Remembrance Day to give a big shout out to all those people who served our nations, the UK, Australia, and the free world in times of conflict, of course, as we remember the fallen, and particularly those people in rugby league with a connection to the military. And I know that every year when the Challenge Cup rolls around in your part of the world, we see the army and the services taking part in that time-honoured tradition of challenging for that beautiful piece of silverware, which I remember finally going to the final at the Twin Towers back in 1997. But in terms of remembering those who served, a big shout out to those in the veteran community today on Remembrance Day.
Yeah, 100% Costa. No doubt if people hadn't made the ultimate sacrifice, we probably wouldn't be here doing this this recording right now. So 100% thank you. And let's remember and let's not forget. Rugby League World Cup. Costa, I mean, there's a feast of rugby league at the moment, isn't there? You've got the men's tournament, you've got the women's, you've got the wheelchair game. It's if you're a lover of rugby league, you're spoiled for choice at the moment.
Well, that's right. And of course, I mean, I've been having a big feeding frenzy myself, staying up until the wee hours of the morning, watching every game. The only game, in fact, just for the trivia buffs out there, if you're wondering, because there's been a bit of night owl work done on my part, Johno. There was a conflict with scheduling the other day. So the Wheelaroos, the Australian wheelchair rugby league team, in fact, most of that squad, if not all of the squad, I had the privilege of calling in the very first State of Origin game for wheelchair early this year. So I couldn't see that game because of the scheduling, and there was another game on. It becomes a bit of a blur, doesn't it? If you're staying up in the early hours of the morning in different time zones, certainly in the case of yours truly on the other side of the world, and taking down notes and, wondering whether the wheelchair game, whether Alizard is going to get the golden boot or will be your hometown hero in not Leroy Brown, but Jack Brown, because it's been a fantastic feast of footy with the wheelchair. The women's, I enjoyed that this morning, particularly that epic contest between the Jillaroos and the Kiwi Ferns. And, I dare say the better side lost. But anyway, in terms of the men's, it doesn't get much better than this weekend, starting with tonight.
Yeah, definitely. In Australia, put Lebanon to the sword. Mal Meninga not 100% happy with the performance. 48 points to 4 victory over Lebanon last Friday. But Australia still Costo cruising along, aren't they? Although, coming up against New Zealand in the semi-final, that has definitely been their strongest test so far. They scored an incredible amount of points so far, Costo. But that victory over Lebanon, probably more about Lebanon and what they'd achieved to get to that point of the game.
I think so, and I think the story is more about players like 𝐂𝐜𝐜𝐸, the fullback for the Cedars, who's got a bright future at Canterbury Bankstown in the NRL, from what I can work out, from what I've seen. This tournament has been a terrific advertisement. It's been a shop window, hasn't it, Johno, for many of the emerging nations. I was one of the privileged few that saw Turuva play in the flesh for his country in his test debut in the Pacific Test for Fiji back in June. But it's been a great showcase of talent. And in terms of the Kangaroos, of course, it did usher in the representative mountain that Nathan Cleary has climbed, and getting that green and gold jumper finally. And so much debate down under whether it will be Daly Cherry Evans or Cleary running the show. I think that's been settled now, and it's been perhaps glossed over, but I want to take my hat off to Daly Cherry Evans and the way he has conducted himself in the passing on of the baton. But Meninga's team, he's got so many dilemmas in terms of like playmakers, for example. But I'll tell you what, Johno, I'll cut to the chase. I've got still big reservations about the front six for the Kangaroos. And I reckon it's the weakest forward pack Australia has fielded in a World Cup semi-final in a long, long time. And for all the history buffs out there, Jono, if you want to go back to 1995 and the Centenary World Cup and the old 𝐂𝐿𝐴 Stadium, as it was called back in those early days, and I think it was almost brand spanking new. I had the privilege of calling there many years ago. But Matthew Ridge had a chance to sink the Kangaroos, didn't he? I see your head working overtime here. And it was the one that got away, Jono, the one that got away. And I think if the rugby league gods are fair and there's any sense of karma, New Zealand will knock out the Kangaroos tonight at Allen Road. And I also might point out for the trivia buffs, 50 years today, Jono, since your blokes last won the World Cup.
Yeah, it's a very, very long time ago, isn't it? It's time to rectify that.
Well, Jono, I bring up the 50-year anniversary to the day here on Remembrance Day, I beg your pardon, on Remembrance Day on 11 November 1972. And such lean pickings for England or Great Britain ever since. And you've had a galaxy of stars. I said on Twitter the other day, Costo Jason, if you want to check us out on Twitter, I said that Jack Brown, he's the best number 6 or the most gifted number 6 that England's had since Ellery Hanley. So, you've had some terrific players. And I know England's not involved, obviously, tonight at Allen Road. Great venue too, that place, and great memories of going to Allen Road. But if the rugby league gods are not on holidays, if they're not on annual leave, well, I think New Zealand, despite their very, very scratchy performance against Fiji, I believe they can get the job done. And wouldn't that put the cat amongst the pigeons?
Yeah, it would do. We'll talk a little bit more about the semi-finals very shortly, Costo. I mean, just before we finish on Australia-Lebanon, is 𝐂𝐜𝐿𝐴, is he the busiest man in world rugby at the moment?
Well, for people like me who don't follow the 15-a-side code, I dare say he is. I believe there was a terrific performance by the Argentinians at Twickenham the other day. Most rugby league people in our part of the world would be oblivious to that. It's only the people who follow, say, Lebanon in rugby league who would be aware of it because of his scheduling juggling act in the last few weeks and coming back and forth. So I'll tell you what I will say about Cheika. There is growing support in old Sydney town, as we say, for him to take charge of an NRL team or an NRL franchise at some stage in the future. I remember interviewing Benny Elias going back a few months ago, and the former Balmain player, legend himself, former Blues icon, Benny Elias was calling for Cheika to be given such a posting in NRL land. And if that meant the West Tigers, then so be it. Benny actually thought he should get the job at the West Tigers. That's before 𝐁𝐮𝐬𝐶𝑒𝑛𝑧 was cemented for his return to Concord. So, he's got a lot of fans out there, Cheika. I didn't follow him in rugby union. It's not my game. It's not my sport. I make no apology for that. But what I do know is that he surrounded himself with some smart cookies in that Lebanese team. I had the privilege of catching up with some of them mid-season for their test match against Malta in Sydney. The likes of Robbie Farah and Matt King are in the inner sanctum there with the Lebanese. The likes of Mitchell Moses and Adam Dwyer, he didn't play that night, but they've got this big family thing happening. And it's a beautiful thing for rugby league, and I hope Lebanon can keep it together. And the best thing of all, Jono, is that they are guaranteed a start in France, as you know, in 2025. And there's a few other teams around the traps who'd be thinking, gee, we'd love to be Lebanon.
Yeah, definitely. That is what you need to cement growth, stability. If you've got that on the horizon and that's guaranteed, it gives you an opportunity to plan with that safety net. And it's something that you've talked about in Super League, isn't it? Where new teams need that time to be able to grow, to be able to lay the foundations.
Oh, for sure. Look, not everyone can come in like the Melbourne Storm and go, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. And that's what happened in rugby league. We didn't have patience with the Perth Reds. We didn't have patience with the Adelaide Rams. We didn't have patience with Toronto. We didn't have patience with PSG. We didn't have patience with Newcastle. We didn't have patience, with a lot of teams in both hemispheres. And when it comes to coming up with some strategic blunders, rugby league is as good as it gets.
Yeah, 100%. Well, the second quarter-final in the men's tournament was England versus Papua New Guinea. 46 points to 6 victors were the English, and they were red hot in that first half. They absolutely blew the Cumals away.
They were. Look, George Williams, I've been involved in some of the discussions regarding the upcoming Golden Boot Award, the most prestigious award in the game, and as part of the Rugby League commentariat, if I could be so colourful on the podcast today, Johno, and very privileged. My thanks, big shout out to Brad Walter at the International Rugby League. He's been doing an outstanding job for the IRL, juggling his NRL commitments, of course, and he's a great champion for the international game. So there's a number of people sticking their beak in, handing out votes here and there and everywhere. And George Williams is certainly in the thick of it. We talk about Luai and Addo Carr and other players that have lit up the tournament. And look at as far as I'm concerned, England, I don't think anyone could have stopped them that day. So Papua New Guinea, they were going around kicking stones in Port Moresby and Lae and Madang and Goroka and Wewak and Rabaul and different places. Because as you know, Jono, millions of people actually watch it there. I know that there's been some great numbers viewing-wise that have been rolled out by John Dutton and the Rugby League World Cup team as recently as the last day or so. But don't forget, in a country of 8 million people or so, where my cousin captained the country, where my father worked and lived, they absolutely love it. People walking for an hour or more, going into villages to get a television set so they can watch their beloved Kumals. And nowadays, of course, Jono, let's not forget their sisters, the 𝐂𝐻𝐿𝐴𝐻, and we wish them very well in their future endeavours because, of course, they're still alive and kicking. But nobody could have beaten the Pommies the other day. They were outstanding. Burgess, how good is he? He loves the big games and he just eats up the meters like Pac-Man if you were born in the 1970s.
Yeah, out of contract as well, Burgess, looking for a new club.
I see that. And I tell you what, if I was chief executive of a club in England or Australia or France or New Zealand, I'd want him because we talk about players emerging like Turuva for Fiji or Karaz for Lebanon. What about players at the back end of their career? He's still got oodles to offer, and you'd actually have to have a brain fade to think otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. And you've already mentioned George William. He's actually been involved in the most amount of tries in the tournament so far. 3 tries he scored, 7 try assists, and 4 other try involvements. One player who came back into the side against Papua New Guinea was Tommy Makinson.
How good was he?
Unbelievable. Out with Ryan Hall, in with Tommy Makinson, and it's a seamless transition, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I'm a big Tommy Makinson fan. I sent him some messages, I think, 12 months ago and wished him well. I'm an unashamed Makinson fan, and of course, there's more to rugby league than goal kicking, but New Zealand have got a problem coming into this weekend. And if it's a close game at Allen Road, that's probably something that hasn't had a lot of publicity. But perhaps in pre-game talk tonight, watch this space. If it's a close game, will New Zealand take a shot at goal? Or they think, nah, stuff that for the embarrassment. Let's go for 4, possibly 6. Makinson's a fantastic finisher. Let's not be delusional here. And he can kick goals as well. He's a value add for Coach Wayne. That's no slight on Hall. Hall's been a great servant, popular figure, of course, in your part of the world. Yeah. Been there, done that. But he's made a big contribution to the England team to getting them this far. So that shouldn't be overlooked as well. But there's some dilemmas there for Wayne. He's had to juggle it as best he can. But Williams, that short kicking game, he's got it on a string.
Yeah. Well, he looks very much like the player that Canberra signed a good few years ago, doesn't he? He seems to have recaptured that form and he's performing on the biggest stage. Tommy Makinson, again, though, people down under might get to see a bit more of his kicking when St Helens travel to take on Penrith in the World Club Challenge. That's been resurrected.
Yeah, and I'm pleased you brought that up on the podcast today, Jono, because Penrith got a smack in the chops going back 12 months ago or thereabouts because they basically were joy killers when it came to the World Club Challenge. And, some of these Aussie officials, let's call them out for this, hey. We had the Wallabies, I think we had the Hockey Roos and the Ollie Roos and whatever other Roos travelling here and there and everywhere. And Rugby League had special doctors that our players, so super fit, so super strong, so superhuman, but so vulnerable. That's why we actually had to put off this big international showpiece called the World Cup for 12 months. But look, getting back to the World Club Challenge, it's been a tradition in the game on and off, admittedly with some gaps along the way. But, at least the show's going on here and Saints coming down under. And I'm sure a lot of people will want to come and see the best of British, because that's exactly what St Helens have been in recent times. And they deserve all the bouquets coming their way. But a big test coming up. The powerhouse from Western Sydney, the reigning Penrith Panthers, the reigning premiers, the dynasty is there for them to gobble up. And who's going to say they can't keep going?
Yeah, definitely one to look forward to. And a game that many people will look forward to took place in our home city of Hull. New Zealand versus Fiji. Fiji based here for the Rugby League World Cup. New Zealand made to work very hard for their victory. In fact, having to come from behind to beat the Barties. So a fantastic game of rugby league, Costo, and maybe Fiji will count themselves unlucky.
Well, they will, and I count them very unlucky. I've actually got the privilege of going to Fiji next week, John, to call the Fiji Rugby League Nines in 𝐂𝐴𝐿𝐴. Not my first trip to Fiji, obviously, to call rugby league in that part of the world, but the boys have touched down at Nandi a couple of days ago, and they're catching up with their loved ones, their family, and I know that from your own experience watching what's happened in the recent weeks, if people didn't realise then, they certainly do now, that family is so important to not only the Polynesian teams, but the Melanesian teams. And of course, Fiji is the sleeping giant of Melanesian rugby league. Everyone talks about Papua New Guinea. Can they go further in the comp? Can they go deep? What about Fiji? Well, they were probably cranky that nobody gave them any oxygen. It was all about everybody else. It was about Samoa, Tonga, Kiwis, Kangaroos, and England, but no Fiji. And even Papua New Guinea was in the conversation there. So I thought Fiji were terribly unlucky. And 𝐂𝐴𝐿𝐴 was just unbelievable, playing out of his skin. Terrific. I caught up with him a couple of months ago near Sydney Airport with the 𝐂𝐜𝐿𝐴 who play in the Ron Massey Cup. It was the Fijian Old Boys Day. James Pickering was there and Jared Hayne was there. The 𝐂𝐴𝐿𝐴 boys obviously were there with Wes coaching that team. And it was a beautiful day of brotherhood. And so the families are going to get the chance to see their boys in the coming days. I'm looking forward to catching up with some of them next week when I call the Nines. But they were so unlucky. And Jono, just summing up, New Zealand in that quarterfinal, they dodged a missile. They nearly got blown off the face of the earth.
Yeah, Michael Maguire as well, admitting it's probably the kick up the backside what they needed.
Yeah, for sure. They needed the kick up the backside and to be put into the naughty corner, because they were found wanting their much vaunted forward pack, supposedly the best front row rotation in international rugby league, and they were almost, well, I don't want to say marshmallow-like or powder puffs, but they were going into that zone, because Fiji, look what Sims was doing. Sims, for goodness sake, was probably sunning himself with budgie smugglers on some beach from Bondi to Bega, and gets called into the Fijian setup because of players pulling out. Don't forget, Jono, players pulled out of the Fijian Barty squad. And look what happened to Joe Dakutonga. We got people in the British Rugby League media and the Australian media, they can't even pronounce his name. He was head coach, got sick. Well, a wise Katavarata comes in, a wise man in more ways than one. He did an outstanding job. And I think Fiji deserve a lot of accolades for going so close and unlucky, because I'll tell you what, that controversy with the penalty, that was just rubbish. And I called it out at the time. It'll be fish and chip paper. Well, now and into the future, people will forget about it. But Manu got a lucky break. He may well pick up the golden boot, but if he's any good at gymnastics like he is good at rugby league, he should bend over backwards and kiss his backside.
Well, I was going to say, Costo, did Fiji actually blow it? Because they had the opportunity a couple of times, didn't they, to really test New Zealand, and they just didn't take it.
Well, I think the match. I think the end result with that video analysis was wrong. I think it was wrong. And if the decision went the other way, do you think New Zealand would have won the match?
They'd have had a lot. There weren't much time to go, was they? They definitely had it. They was up against it.
Jono, that was the turning point in the game. New Zealand, you would have had to check their underpants after that initial call by the match official, by the referee, and then it went upstairs, and we all know what happened. And And, you know, at the end of the day, nothing's going to change the outcome. New Zealand dodged a bullet, and Fiji were dreadfully unlucky not to advance to the semi-finals.
No, but how great it is, Costo, to be talking about competitive international rugby league that isn't Australia versus New Zealand, that isn't England versus Australia. It's other nations who are competing on the biggest stage.
Yep. And Johno, look, I don't want to say it's only me, but I was there in that early days of that big wave. I think I've spoken about this once or twice before on your podcast. And if I can indulge just for a moment, in the early 2000s, that wave of players with Ali Lauitiiti, Clinton Torpey, Henry Fa'afili, Jerry Se'u, all that crowd. I've probably left out a heap of other great players as well. Please forgive me, but in keeping with mindful of the clock for your podcast, that the world has changed so much. But guess what? In 10 years straight on calling on Sky Television, I called Samoa once. What does that tell you about the officials running the game? We couldn't even give them respect. Now, you know, and having said that, I couldn't believe it the other day. You know, some of these British people in the rugby league media getting their war dances mixed up, couldn't even work out that Samoa was wearing blue, not red. You know, there's been a lot of time for people to prepare for the tournament, to broadcast the game, to showcase the game. We all make mistakes, me included, but it's about time people got it right, because there's two big games coming up this weekend, and of course the finale at Old Trafford. So it's all about respect, and it's all about showcasing the cultural star power of these nations from Polynesia and Melanesia, and giving them a go. It's a bit like old colonial days, Jono, and I'm going to get on my soapbox here, political soapbox. It's a bit like the old colonial days and saying, we're not going to give you independence. How do you reckon that was going to go for the British in, say, in places in Africa and other parts of the world, and for Australia for that matter in the Pacific, if we said, no, you have to wait. No, you have to wait. Do you reckon that would have went down well in different parts of the world? No. And rugby league wasn't prepared to give them a go, give them a sense of empowerment, you know, and it's finally happened. I believe this day was coming. You're right in what you say. But, Jono, it should have happened years ago, well before COVID.
Definitely, Costa. And two countries who face the same struggles, Tonga versus Samoa, but they did serve up probably the game of the tournament so far. Absolutely. Couldn't take your eyes off it from minute 0 to the end. It was a fascinating encounter.
Must-see TV, wasn't it? And Milford played out of his skin. I didn't think he was good enough to play such a game. Luai, well, different story there, different kettle of fish. He was amazing. Palo playing up front was awesome. I see he's been cleared after getting some love in his appeal from the judiciary outcome initially, a one-match suspension. Now he's free to play. So good luck to him. Look, a galaxy of stars on show for red or blue. Taumalolo will be disappointed, particularly, and it would be remiss of us today on the podcast, Jono, if we didn't salute Jason Taumalolo, because at the end of the day, he lit the Pacifica fuse and others followed. And I say God bless him for that. Yeah,
definitely 100% Costo. Samoa seem to be getting it right now, don't they? Matty Parrish, although I've noticed after the game, he slapped a media ban on the players, which is brilliant, isn't it, when you're trying to grow the game and then, you know, people want access to the stars.
Unbelievable. Jono, I'll say it now. The sooner he finishes up as Samoa coach, the better it will be for Samoa, the better it will be for International Rugby League. For goodness sake, Jono, I'll tell you something. Back in June, Samoa played at Campbelltown. They decided not to have a fan day at Campbelltown. There is a huge Samoan community in southwestern Sydney. Yes, they're in Western Sydney. Yes, they're in southeast Queensland, in places like Logan. We all know about South Auckland. I know about South Auckland. Weren't they going off like a frog in a sock? A big shout out to everybody in South Auckland watching the podcast, whether you're in Manurewa or Papatoetoe or Papakura or Mangere East, home of the Mighty Hawks at Walter Massey Park. There's some great clubs out there in Brotown and great culture as well. But, you know, look, it's a great thing. It's an exciting time. You can see the look on my face. I am excited, Jono. It's a great time to be excited about rugby league. But Parrish, they didn't have a fan day in Campbelltown. I tried to get him on the phone for the local FM radio station. How do you reckon I got on? a big fat 0. But thankfully, Tony Iro and the Cook Islands were most accommodating, as were the PNG Kumals. But from Samoa, we got a big fat 0, including from the coach.
Yeah, such a shame, isn't it? Such a shame. But Samoa definitely looking much better than that opening round defeat against England. And obviously, Samoa now...
Well, Johno, I want to say this to everyone watching, because I know there'll be skewed towards Northern Hemisphere viewers on your podcast for obvious reasons. I suspect, and I don't think there's been a lot of publicity about it from what I can glean, but I reckon England are scared about this Samoan side that's wounded after what happened at St. James's Park. They are very nervous about this game, and they're not letting on how nervous they really are. And I've still got question marks, as good as Burgess is, and Radley, and some of their lesser lights, like Chris Hill. How good's he? How good is he, Jono?
Well, he was good. He was good a few years ago, and he's probably on he's having a swan song now, isn't he?
Well, that's right. But he has to step it up. Like this, the front six for Samoa. The front six for Samoa. Just imagine for a minute, if they play as good or half as good as they did against Tonga this weekend. How do you reckon that's going to go for England? Do you think Makinson's going to have a field day out wide like he did the other day against the Kumals?
No, and this is where this is top level rugby league now, isn't it? You look at the matchup between Burgess, Junior Paulo, Chris Hill, Royce Hunt. Liggy Sow's featuring, obviously no stranger to rugby league fans over here. For me, though, I think England's strength would be that Elliot Whitehead, John Bateman, Victor Radley. I think them three, they could be the difference on Saturday.
I'm not saying England can't win. I reserve my judgment. I'll put out my tips, as I have done before each game, on my Twitter feed, on the handle, again, Costo Jason, for those people wanting to have a look, including my team of the week, the team of the round, across all three formats. And we'll continue to do that. So, as I said, I'm not writing the Pommies off. I'm not doing that at all. They've got a date with destiny as far as they're concerned. And can they get to Old Trafford? Well, they just got to get there. They just got to somehow get there. But, Samoa will take some stopping. Who's going to try and stop Luai with that massive step? Whose job will that be? The kicking game's so important. We know that George Williams has got a terrific short kicking game. I think it might have been Brian Noble, my former colleague at the Bradford Bulls, heaping praise on Williams, a couple of weeks ago, saying at the time, at the peak of his powers, he had the best short kicking game in the world. That's a big call from Nobby, but who am I to disagree with that? But when it comes to getting out of your own end, if you're struggling to get out of your own end, and those big boppers for Samoa, those blue forwards keep belting them and bashing them, and they're struggling to get out of their own end, they're going to have to try and get it down the other end of the field pretty well. And we all know how good the Samoan fullback is, even if he does lead with the knee.
Yeah, very lucky boy. Very sympathetic match review panel, I think. And England, no stranger to a tight, tense semi-finals. Of course, we saw 2013, New Zealand pipping England at Wembley in the World Cup semi-final. Fast forward to the 2017 tournament. Tonga, of course, that amazing comeback, just fell short for feet to knock on, controversially called. I think this is going to be another nail-biter for England, and I expect it to be probably the closest of the two semi-finals, Costo.
Well, I don't want heartbreak for England. It would be so good for the game, and I don't want to be sounding that I'm just saying this to make you feel good and make your viewers feel good. But how good would it be to see England ice the victory and get through to Old Trafford? And I don't know how the ticket sales are for the organisers if England don't qualify for the final. But if Milford ices the game, as I said, he played out of his skin the other day. I couldn't quite believe, not only with what his contribution was in attack, but also some of his stops in defence were, that's as good as I've seen him play in a rep jumper. It was fantastic stuff, and he was the perfect foil, partnering Luai in the halves. But Suoli'i, I wouldn't all be surprised if he's in the 3-2-1 in the post-match analysis in this semi-final. He is an amazing player, and we've just seen his entry into big-time footy. And we'll be talking about him, I suspect, at the 2025 World Cup in France, the 2029 World Cup, wherever that's going to be. And I'm disappointed. It would appear that it ain't going to be in the United States. I think that's very disappointing coming out of the IRL. But he'll be around for a long time. And Johno, he brings people through the turnstiles. And we need people in all sport, including rugby league. I think it'll be an amazing game. And as I said, I haven't quite settled on who I'm tipping. I'll have another look at the teams as it gets closer. But, of course, the focus being on the big game tonight with the Kiwis and the Kangaroos.
My prediction, Costo, is that with 10 minutes to go, we still won't be any clear who's going to win the game. I think it'll be tight, tense, and I think it'll go down to the last 10 minutes of the game.
Well, I wouldn't be at all surprised if both semi-finals follow that prediction, that forecast coming out of your studio. I wouldn't at all be surprised. And if it's a Milford field goal, if it's a Williams field goal, it's a Makinson penalty goal, and on the flip side, well, don't expect New Zealand to kick too many penalty goals. Maybe it's a rap and a try in the corner or something like that. The old stager getting across the whitewash, and for the Kangaroos, maybe it is Nathan Cleary after his, well, not so impressive debut in the green and gold. Let's put it that way.
No, definitely not. Moving across, we've already spoke about it briefly. Costo, Australia and New Zealand taking place at Ellen Road. Australia have recalled Regan Campbell-Gillard. Ben Hunt recalled. It looks like, though, Daly Cherry-Evans has probably played his last game for the Australians.
Would appear so, and I think the writing was on the wall, as I said earlier in the podcast this afternoon, with the changing of the guard or the passing on of the baton. And you can't have your cake and eat it. So obviously, Meninga wants Hunt involved, and whether people agree with what is the eventuality here, whether he starts or comes off the bench. You know, these team selections that come out a couple of days ago. Again, I go back to my Twitter feed, Johno. Big deal. It's like a jumble sale with these jersey numbers, and there's 24-man squads. Why don't they just announce on Tuesday the 5 players that aren't participating?
Yeah, definitely. Big battle.
Honestly, that's one thing in this tournament that's been done poorly, and it's probably been compounded by the attitude of the Australians. And, you know, it does nothing. You know, we commentators like me, we want to wax lyrical. We want to say that Coruscant is one of the best number 9s in the game, but not if he's wearing jersey 33.
No, and that has brought much higher from many supporters, hasn't it? The squad numbers. It'd be interesting to see whether this is continued in France at the next World Cup, or whether it's something that's going to be done and dusted after this one. It's a box office game, Costo. Australia, New Zealand. It's the 16th time they've played at a World Cup. Another battle, though, away from the two teams is Tedesco versus Joey Manu. It's going to be a fantastic battle between them two.
Yeah, look, and I think the players that you've just mentioned there, along with Jerome Hughes, and they're the usual suspects that'll feature in at the back end of the game, when the game is there to be won and lost. And I wouldn't all be surprised, if you said to me, who's going to win the Golden Boot, who's going to be the player of the final? Well, you've got to get to the final. You can win the Golden Boot without playing in the final. I think Manu is going to take some stopping. If he plays well in this game, New Zealand will go a long way to winning. I think New Zealand, again, I don't want to be disparaging towards the Kangaroo forward pack, but, they're following in the footsteps of some amazing players over the last 5 decades. They really are. And, I had the privilege of calling so many Trans-Tasman test matches, Anzac test matches, as the voice of rugby league in New Zealand in the first decade of the 21st century. And it was a great privilege and honour. And to me, the forward pack for Australia doesn't put the fear of God into their New Zealand brothers like it used to. And there hasn't got that wow factor. The Australian playmakers, the Australian spine is still terrific, isn't it? When you can leave Daly Cherry-Evans out, and you've got players like Cleary coming in on debut the other day, well documented, of course. Tedesco, who on his day is the best player in the game, isn't he? That running action of his, what a player he's been. A great player, on the international stage, not just for the Kangaroos, of course, but a big shout out to the Azzurri and his contribution to Italian rugby league. And I know that Leo Epifania, the Italian coach, and Taz Battieri and the Brains Trust with the Azzurri would be appreciative of those sort of sentiments, not just from me, but from others, because we need people like that to grow the game, Johno. And but in terms of this contest, you know, and I just think that the Australian front row forward rotation, I just don't think they can hold the Kiwis, and that provides a great platform for the likes of Joey Manu to work off the back of that, and a scheming Jahrome Hughes. Remembering, of course, he wasn't on the field at the start of the tournament, but I think he'll have a big say at the back end of the tournament.
Yeah, and talking about forwards, no Jerome Wairara-Hargreaves, but Premiership winner Moses Leota returns for New Zealand, and he's going to be a big bopper.
Leota with the big motor. It's not a V6 either. You know, you go down to your local dealership, Humberside, Johno. I'm not sure you can buy a vehicle like Moses. And, you know, we've got a few Moses running around in the game, but, you know, he'll part some defences. I don't think he'll part the Red Sea, but he'll part some defences because he'll be champing at the bit to skittle the Kangaroos. What a great way to be for Michael Maguire, for Madge, to say, as we say in television, come on down.
Definitely. And he will be coming on down, and he'll be, like you said, skittling over the Australian forwards.
I tell you what, Johno, when you come down under next, I'll take you on a road trip in my Prado, which famously come out of the showroom floor with Toyota, the local Toyota dealer. Not that there's any kickbacks with Toyota on your program, and a big thanks to your sponsors as well. But I've run over plenty of Kangaroos in my day. Guess what? I reckon Moses is going to be, and he's got a few mates, are going to be like Costo and his Prado this weekend, starting tonight.
Fantastic. And before we wrap up, Costo, just a mentions for the Wheelchair Rugby League. I mean, bringing new audiences to the game. I think people who are not necessarily Rugby League fans are interested by Wheelchair Rugby League. It's one of the most inclusive sports because it really includes everybody can play it. And the spectacle, the game's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, can I just give a big shout out to Jeffrey Townsend and the Americans as well? Don't forget, you know, this was a sport that was unheard of in the US of A, 18 months ago, and look what they've achieved in this tournament. And you mean I had the privilege of calling Wales and Scotland 12 months ago. The game in round 3 was a lot closer than I anticipated. I thought that the Bravehearts would be blown off the park, but you know, to the Welsh boys, well done. You had to really dig deep for that victory, but it's been a great advert. You are so spot on, Johno, because people out there who are not connected with the game, they're not connected with grassroots rugby league or state of origin, War of the Roses as it used to be, or Super League, whatever, NRL, but they see this product because that's what it is. And Dave Woods, and I've got a lot of time for Woodsy, I think he made a good comment going back a week or two ago, and he made a reference to the fact that broadcasters should be queuing up for this sort of stuff because it's good product. It's exciting. It's a smash-up derby on 2 wheels where people just throw their bodies into battle and throw the steeding around, and we call it Wheelchair Rugby League. And as I said, I had the privilege of calling the very first wheelchair state of origin game this year. We called international stuff last year in Wales, and I just think we've got exciting times ahead for the game, and particularly those less fortunate, Johno, as we recognise our war veterans today. Don't lose sight of the fact that there are people who have been serving their nation who come home in a different way, physically and mentally, both in some cases or most cases, and the mind boggles, doesn't it? We're so lucky that we don't have to do that job, Johno. I'm sure I speak for so many people in the free world thinking, thank goodness we don't have to do that. But they come back smashed up and they can be involved in rugby league. When we talk about inclusiveness, you know, you imagine losing a limb, a leg. I couldn't get my head around that ever, I don't think. Yet these people who've been traumatised, a number of them have put their hand up and made a contribution and are making a great contribution to the greatest game of all through Wheelchair Rugby League. And for that, we salute them.
Yeah, definitely. And it's gained that much popularity, Costo, that England's next game's actually been moved from, it was going to be on the BBC iPlayer, it's actually been moved to BBC Two. It's going to be primetime national TV. So it's got a fantastic opportunity to showcase to the whole nation what a brilliant game it is. So it is really gaining popularity. And that brings us to the end of the latest Red Robin Podcast World Cup special with Johno and Costo. A huge thank you to everyone who's tuned into this episode, either on YouTube or podcast. Your support and comments are very much appreciated. We are, of course, powered by Budget Ties Auto Centre and 360 Chartered Accountants. And we are very much looking forward to the penultimate games in the Men's Rugby League World Cup. And after 50 long years, is Shaun Wane set to bring Rugby League home?
We'll find out soon. See you, John.